Let's dive right in. We're about to question one of the most basic rules of logic, something we use every single second of every day. We just assume everything is either true or false. But what if it's not? What if there's a third option? We're going to explore a completely different way of thinking.
I mean, this feels pretty obvious, right? A light switch is either on or it's off. A coin toss is heads or tails. This simple binary choice seems like the absolute foundation of reason. But today, we're going to take a hammer to that very foundation. So on one side, you've got classical logic. It's all neat and tidy. True, false. End of story. But on the other side, you have this thing called intuitionistic logic. It introduces a third state, a big old question mark, an undecidable. And that little question mark, it changes everything. Okay, so let's start with what we all know. Classical logic is basically the operating system for most of our thinking. It works on this really simple but powerful idea that everything has to fit into one of two boxes, no exceptions. This has a fancy name, the principle of the excluded middle. It sounds way more complicated than it is. All it means is that for any statement, like the car is red, either that's true or the statement the car is not red is true. There's no in between. It is or it isn't. Simple. But in the early 20th century, a new way of thinking started bubbling up, and it challenged this fundamental rule. This wasn't just a small disagreement. It was a total revolution in how we even define what truth is. And the guy leading this revolution was a Dutch mathematician, L.E.J. Brouwer. He was the founder of a philosophy he called Intuitionism, and he had a totally radical idea about what it means for something to be true. So what was Brouwer's problem with the old way? Well, he felt that truth shouldn't be some abstract thing just floating out there in the universe waiting to be discovered. He argued that truth has to be connected to what we humans can actually know, and more importantly, what we can prove. And this leads us to the absolute heart of intuitionism. For an intuitionist, truth isn't something you just find, it's something you have to build. Here's the crucial part. You can't just say a statement is true. You have to be able to show your work. You need what's called a constructive proof, a real step-by-step method that actually builds or demonstrates the thing you're talking about. So the process kind of looks like this. You state your idea, and then you try to build a proof for it. If you build it successfully, awesome. The proposition is true. And if you can prove that it's absolutely impossible to build, then it's false. But this simple process leaves a giant gaping hole. Because what happens in that space between finished and impossible? This is exactly where intuitionistic logic veers off the path and creates a whole new category of existence. This is the key question, right? What about all those statements where we haven't finished building the proof, but we also haven't proven that it's impossible? They're not proven true, and they're not proven false. So where in the world do they go? They go into the third state. This is like a logical waiting room. It's the home for all those undecidable ideas. They are, quite literally, under construction, just waiting for someone to either finish the job or prove it can't be done. And just like that, our neat little world of two choices is gone. We're now dealing with three distinct possibilities. Brouwer even formalized this into a new way of looking at things. Brouwer laid it out like this. First, you can prove something is true by building it. Second, you can prove it's absurd or false by showing it's impossible to build. And third, you can prove the absurdity of its absurdity. Now that sounds like a mouthful, but all it really means is you've shown it's not impossible to prove. It hasn't been proven false yet, even if you don't have that final finished proof of it being true. And this third state, it changes the rules of the game. So when you accept this third state, some of the rules of logic that we just take for granted get turned completely upside down. Let's look at the most famous and probably the weirdest one. All right, get ready for this because it can really mess with your head. In intuitionistic logic, proving that a statement is not true is not the same thing as proving that it's true. I know, it sounds bizarre, but our construction idea makes it make perfect sense. Let's go back to the building analogy. Proving something is not true is like going over a building's blueprint and showing that there are no fatal flaws. You've proven it's not impossible to build. But that's very different from actually pouring the concrete and putting up the walls, right? That final act of actually constructing the building is what an intuitionist would call true. See the difference? Okay, so let's wrap this up. What are the big things to remember? First, intuitionism throws a wrench in the simple true or false machine we're used to. Second, it says that for something to be true, you have to build it. You need a constructive proof. Third, this whole process creates a third state for ideas that are still a work in progress. And maybe the wildest consequence of all, showing something isn't false is just not good enough to prove that it's true. You have to do the work and build the thing. This leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. Brouwer was applying this to mathematics, but what if we applied it to other parts of our lives? What obvious truths are we just accepting on faith instead of actually taking the time to construct the proof for ourselves? That's a powerful thought. Thanks for watching.